Riseborough. The star and producer of this wonderful film, Kate Winslet.
I can't believe it. I've really actually made the film, and I don't have to keep trying to make the film. And it's an amazing feeling, because I have truly imagined getting to this moment now where I will be talking to people about the film, and I would visualize that in my mind. And here I am. Honestly, I really am so grateful to everyone for being here, and just thank you so much
First feature producing credit, hell of a way to start. But what was it about Lee Miller and her story that you were so committed to getting on the screen? Because, as you say, it took you many years, you got here, but it wasn't easy.
I mean, it's independent filmmaking, and Andrew and I both grew up very much in that world, in spite of Titanic, The Holiday. The majority of the work that I've done has been in that independent world, and it's hard to make films about women, and it's hard to make films as a woman. But when I first knew about Lee back in 2001, I'd been to an exhibition of her work in Edinburgh. And so I was aware of her photographic work, but I didn't know anything about her life. And in 2015, I bought a table. Andrew's heard me tell this story so many times. But some friends of mine called me, and they run an auction house in the UK, and they said, Kate, there's this incredible table that's come in. I've never bid on anything in my life, by the way, that's not my vibe. But I said, well, tell me about this table. They were so excited about it. They said, it's just the history, it's incredible. It was a kitchen table owned by the Penrose family, Roland's family. And it was in a holiday home that they all shared. And when Lee and Roland were lovers in the early days, they would spend wonderful sort of hedonistic summers of love in this home. And Lee was an incredible cook, and she would prepare food at this table, and they would eat these wonderful meals, and they would talk and discuss and share and fight and feast and probably fuck on the table, quite honestly. And so I bought this table, and it arrived in my home, and I sat down at it, and I just thought, how has anyone ever made a film about Lee Miller, this extraordinary woman? And the second I Googled her, which was the first thing I did to start the beginning of my very deep dive, I couldn't believe how she was described. Former muse, ex-lover of Man Ray, ex-cover girl, former model. And I just thought, okay, why is this woman being defined in this strange way with these labels that have been put on her, these infantilizing words that we use to describe her, and that word muse, is so reductive. And of course I knew she was so much more. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if I could make a film about her and maybe introduce her to people for the first time in this way, for who she really was, this decade of her life when Lee became Lee, having done this extraordinary thing, fighting her way to the front in the way that she did, and capturing what was happening in the cracks and in the shadows to those voiceless victims, and making sure that those stories were never ever forgotten, and not only never forgotten, but honoured and remembered and told to all of us. That early reportage work, that were it not for Lee, we would maybe not have these kinds of images and this kind of work that photojournalists do, especially the women who compromise and leave families behind, and she never looked away. She could have just gone home, but she didn't. And it was that streak of injustice in her because of what had happened to her as a child that I thought, my God, I have to honour that story, how she wouldn't be defined by that thing that had happened. She refused to be defined by men, but she lived that life at full throttle, paying that emotional price. And I just thought, I want to make a film about this woman. And that was the beginning.
Hearing those reductive descriptions of her, which I've seen too, and they are insane, the film feels like just an incredible counterstatement. Like, you watch this and you're like, how could anyone ever describe her that way given this life she led? So it's an amazing feat of redefining this person in the way that she should be, I think. Andrea, what did you know about her coming into the movie?
I mean, I did know, thank you for coming, everyone. I did know her work. And really this, I suppose for me, this was the Lee Miller that I knew. Well, I didn't really know that people sort of thought of her as a muse. That came backwards. I don't know whether I was, I seem to process things at arse end, you know, generally, but this was the part that had come to me first. And what I understood of her was that she was a groundbreaking war photojournalist and also a brilliant writer. And so the thing that I knew very little about was Audrey Withers, the character I play, and how instrumental Vogue was as a platform for women at the time who were able to get they were able to go to university but not get a degree in some universities, and they would do all of the studying and then not actually get a certificate. They were only allowed to write for publications when they were talking about shoes and skirts and all sorts of things, which are, you know, and much respect to those things. But there were lots of women there who came out of Oxford and Cambridge, and many, those were the privileged ones, so many more who didn't have those advantages, who just would never have the chance to write or be a photojournalist. And so what inspired me so much when Kate brought this character, Audrey, to me, was that Audrey was a real socialist, in quite a sort of conservative world, and desperately wanted to give Lee Miller a platform because she could see her, and I thought that relationship was so precious.
Kate, I believe in your producerial capacity, you called up certain actors, asked them to be a part of this. Andrea was one of them, if I have that right?
Andrea was the first one.
Andrea was the first one.
Andrea was the first one because I've known Andrea's work forever and ever, and the way in which she attacks a role, and I mean attack from the inside out, I thought, God, I think I do that, and I think we'd get along. And so when the script was ready after the initial 5 years of development, because Lee lived so many lives. I mean, look, later on in her life, she had a facelift and became a cordon bleu chef, okay? So this was a woman who was very restless. She just kept going. She would take risks, and she lived at the almost edge of her existence in so many ways. And so settling on this particular decade of her life was the biggest challenge when it came to the writing. I also am a huge believer in everyone has to start somewhere, so we had a first-time features writer initially on this project. It was a first-time features director, Ellen Kuras, a much revered cinematographer across decades, who had started directing television. And our first-time writer, Marion Hume, she and I together really put together this construct of this decade, because I really believed it was the decade that Lee herself would have been the proudest of. And Antony Penrose, Lee's son, who is very much alive and is a wonderful man and became a great friend. The first thing I did when I knew I wanted to make this film was to go and meet him, so I made a pan of soup and I put it in the back of my car and I drove to his home, which amazingly I discovered was only 90 minutes from where I live. I couldn't believe it. And that front room that you see us depict is the front room in that house where I did most of my research. So I would sit on the floor with Antony and we had everything out of the archive, including letters between Lee and Audrey and Lee and Roland. Wonderful, insightful things, diaries that Lee had kept as a teenager when she really struggled at that time with her mental health. her camera kit. Davy Sherman's camera kit, strangely, is in the archive as well. And so once all of that had been poured into the story and it felt authentic, I thought, right, I've got to send this to Andrea. And so Andrea committed to a version of the script that was very early. And when Andrea shows up and she stays, and here she is. And this film was really put together by people showing up for me. And our first assistant director, Richard Stiles, I met him when I was 19 years old, and he was a little floor runner on Hamlet at Shepperton Studios, running around making cups of tea for all the actors. And he became a first AD, and I had a first conversation with him some years ago. I said, if I ever get this off the ground, would you do it? Our costume designer, Michael O'Connor, I met when I was 22, and he was a costume supervisor, which is a totally different job. And again, he showed up, and Gemma Jackson, our production designer, I met her when I was 25 doing Iris. And that's the independent film world. You form these relationships with people that are based on trust and collaboration and a willingness to look out for each other. And so yes, I was in that position as a producer to make those phone calls and say, I've got the money, will you do it? And all of our actors said yes, these wonderful, wonderful actors. And I'm sure you'll all agree, Andy Samberg. He was just phenomenal, and I'll tell you, he was nervous, and he kept being very concerned that audiences wouldn't be able to receive him in this way because he was so complex they would be expecting him to do a funny. And I just kept saying to him, do nothing with your face, trust me. Just do nothing with your face, you've got it. And that took time for him. That's a big jump. Because obviously as a comedian, you raise an eyebrow and it's punctuation, it's a joke, it's a something. And watching him accept acting in a different way and shifting rhythms and really embracing playing Davy. And as you can see by those photos at the end, he looks exactly like a real Davy Sherman. It was extraordinary. And Marion and Noémie Malon and Josh and Alex Skarsgård, I mean, God, he's just so wonderful. He's just wonderful, and I was so lucky to have them all show up. And yeah, it's bizarre. I'm talking about film.
Yeah, it's an incredible cast. Putting my cards on the table, I've spoken to several of your collaborators at this point who have just marveled at your tenacity in putting this thing together. Andrea, I'm wondering how you observed that in Kate.
Well, I mean, just with awe, really. Who doesn't want to flank Kate Winslet, for God's sake? It's like, you know, she was asking us to. Every one of us wanted to support her in anything, in any way that we could, you know. Aside from that, the story was so incredible, and her depth of knowledge of Lee. When somebody's immersed themselves that much, it becomes really infectious, you know. So that changed. I think it changed all of our processes. You know, how much we gave ourselves to the project. How is it to observe? Just bloody brilliant. I've watched Kate since I was, you know, young, and thought, she's free. That's what I think when I watch you. I think she's free. I can't put it in it. That's the most succinctly I could really put it. But it's so rare. And there are those people, you know, those people in life. You see their freedom, and you want to be close to them, like Muhammad Ali, or, you know, wonderful spirits. And Kate has this thing that you want to be around and close to. So that really.
I rewatched the film recently, and the relationship between Lee and Audrey grounds the film in a lot of ways, and it builds to this devastating emotional scene between the two of you that I know was incredibly hard to film. I wonder if you can talk about just developing the relationship between your characters and getting to that moment and what it felt like.
so different to the letters between Lee and Roland, for example, because we get to see their female side, but that femininity that is resilience and strength and compassion and determination. And Audrey was the most phenomenal champion of Lee. You know, she would say, "Keep going, dear girl, we're all rooting for you back home." And she would send her. She sent her underwear and Horlicks, which is a terrible kind of malt drink that there was apparently a real shortage of in Lee's life during the war. And earplugs. There's a wonderful letter which says, "Oh, dear Audrey, if you could please go into the house, second drawer down. I just could do with my earplugs because I have to block out the bombs." I mean, so she would write these incredibly visceral, sort of terrifying things, but in a very matter-of-fact way, knowing that her friend would understand. And when we came to shoot that scene, oh my God, that scene. When we came to shoot the scene with the cutting of the negatives, what was so hard about it was that we filmed that scene and the one immediately afterwards on the stairs in the same day. That was all we were doing that day. And it's very hard as actors when you're playing characters who really existed, number one, but number two, it's very, very hard when you're recreating scenes that really happened. And the scene with the cutting of the negatives was real, and when I was researching the film, I met a woman who's now in her 90s who had been a 15-year-old secretary of at the time, working for Audrey. And she said to me, "Kate, do you know, I must tell you about what happened one day when Lee came into the office in the throes of her PTSD, and I will tell you she was rather drunk. And she came in and she was just furious, and she was like rampaging around the office, opening drawers and ripping open boxes until she found what she was looking for, her Dachau negatives. And she started to hack into them with a pair of scissors because she was determined if the world was not going to see them, that nobody should, and she needed to destroy them. And I was so afraid, the frenzy of this attack, I thought she was going to hurt herself, cut herself with the scissors. And she said, I turned to her and I did what my mother always told me to do, and I put on my big girl voice and I said, "Now you look here, Lee Miller, those are my good scissors, you jolly well give them back." and she said that Lee turned to her and was almost arrested by this young girl's ferocity, that she stopped cutting and she slowly put the scissors down and she left. And as soon as I heard that story, I thought, well, we have to put that in the film. Not least because, of course, it happened and we were trying to make an authentic story, but because it's that metaphor of Lee trying to cut something out of herself. So it was really, really terrible shooting that. And the scene that immediately follows it, Antony Penrose only found out about what had happened to his mother. In fact, Antony Penrose never knew anything about what his mother had done during the war until after her death in 1977. And his baby, his first daughter Amy, had just been born, and his wife turned to him and said, "I wonder if she looks anything like you did as a baby, Tony. Why don't you go into the attic and look in those boxes? There must be a baby photo somewhere. There's none in the house." And he said, "Oh, okay." And he went upstairs and he opened these boxes and he found 60,000 negatives and proofs, and all of Lee's writing and everything that she had just died 5 months earlier, and he had never known. And they had an unbelievably difficult relationship because she had such terrible trauma, and she found it really hard to be a mother. And he describes their relationship as, he's even used the word caustic at times, and he never understood why she couldn't truly love him. And for him, this film has represented a degree of closure, and that's why we wanted to give him the conversation with her, because it's a conversation they never got to have. And so the film for him is so moving. And we knew, to go back to what I was saying, when he then started to unpick who she was and come to know her really for the first time and understand her, he wrote his first book, Lives of Lee Miller, on which the film is partly based. And he went to see his uncles, Lee's brothers, Eric and John, in New York, and he said, "I'm done, it's nearly there. I just feel like there's something, is there anything else? There's just something I feel I haven't quite got. Is there anything?" Sorry, "You've never told me." And they sat him down and they told him,
what had happened to her when she was 7. And he'd never known. And he knows that his father had never known. So forgive me. Oh. So we knew we had to give her that moment in the film and let her tell Audrey, because we had to give her her voice on behalf of so many women in that one moment where she spent her life giving a voice to others. And it was a terrible day, wasn't it, Ange? It was a terrible day to shoot that day, because sometimes you just have to do the thing and you just have to be there, and it really bloody hurts. And we both said that that was the hardest day of filming we'd ever done. At the end of that day, forgive me for getting so emotional, sorry about that. But there was a lot of care and time that was taken. And I'd gone to work that morning with a bottle of champagne and some very nice cheese and bread. And I said to Ange, we're going to have this at the end of the day. We had the whole lot. The whole lot.
After we filmed, when we finished that day, there was this weight that Kate had been carrying for the longest time. I could see on her shoulders, and at the end of that day, I could see lifted. But the thing was as well, in the morning, you can't unsee these images. And if the images are so difficult to unsee, what was it like to even begin to experience? So it really was one of the hardest days of work, I think, psychologically I've ever done.
I could see you getting emotional as well as Kate speaking, and we've spoken before, and you got emotional last time we spoke. So it's something that's it's very present with you. So with that, I very genuinely though, it's very present with you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think it speaks to how long this project has lived with you, and also the impact it's had.
I mean, it's, I can't believe I'm losing my voice, sorry. I think when you play someone who was so important, the only way I could do this was to just really, really do it. So the sense of immersion in her, I mean, I held her clothes, I touched her diaries, she was really in me when we started to shoot. And there's something that takes over sometimes as an actor, and it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you just have to let it permeate and bubble up and reveal itself in ways that can sometimes be quite startling, and sometimes don't always feel necessarily safe either. And they do get stuck to the sides, these kinds of characters, and there are parts of Lee that I know I will always have, and happily so. You know, that phenomenal resilience, the way in which she didn't judge anyone, and she had no sense of malice, she wasn't full of vengeance, and she so easily could have been, but she was propelled by this very powerful streak of injustice because of what had happened to her when she was young, and lived with it and had hidden it, and the shame that she had carried on. And I know so many people like that, and they don't tell their stories. And so it's been, you know, it almost goes beyond in a funny way, playing a character and how you come out the other side. This was a whole chapter of my adult life. You know, my son is 10, and I FaceTimed him earlier and he said, "Oh my God, are you still talking about me?" It's really been, he's like, it has been, I'm just going to say, it has actually been my whole life. I know it's been a bit of yours, it's like it's been my whole life. And I really thought about that. I thought, my God, it really has. Poor bear, it really has. It's been his whole life. Poor little thing. He still doesn't really have a clue who she is. But it's really special, and it's a privilege to have pulled someone out of the shadows where she so easily could have stayed. I mean, historians know who she is, and anyone who has looked at those arresting images of the Second World War will be very familiar with Lee's work. But I'm sure the majority of you here this evening had never even heard of her. And that was why I wanted to make the film. I wanted to bring her to audiences and hope that they would meet her for the first time this way. And that's really why I wanted to make the film. I wanted to
To close, I wonder if you could each speak a little bit about what it's been like to share the film with people these last few months, the kinds of conversations you've had, how it's felt to see it out there, even.
I think what's fascinating for both of us is learning how little people know about Lee Miller. That's something that's quite, she should be taught in history. It seems part of the course. It's very strange. And also because she couldn't get to the front line, and so we have all this incredible photojournalism that had she got to the front line we might not have had, and changed war journalism in ways that we can't even imagine now, where people aspire to exactly what Lee Miller captured. But yet she's not really taught. I mean, maybe she is, maybe I'm just old, maybe she's now taught in schools, but I certainly wasn't taught about her. And I think in many ways, coming from a country that was really, really ravaged by war, for our grandparents, the fact that we don't know about her, and also we so often in our industry have very sensational representations of war, often incredibly beautiful, but so full of tension, explosions, and this is, when I see this, I think of my Nana, my grandma. I think of my grandmas, I think of my granddads who were 18 in a trench, and all of those war children, really. And it really affected, as war does, multi-generationally affects you. So that was really a shock for me in all of this, that people didn't know more about Lee Miller.
I think the thing that has taken me by surprise is the very different reactions that people have to her story. But the one thing that I didn't anticipate, I have to be honest, is the women who've come up to me afterwards, women I've never met in my life, and they will pull on my sleeve, or they'll pull me in close to them, and they will say, "That was me, I was told to never tell." And that is something, that's really something, to think that those people might feel less shame, actually. And the other reaction too is people saying, "Oh my God, I've just got to get out and do something with my life. I've just got to get out there and do something." I mean, that was Lee, she just got up and she just did it. And I think for me, that's been another surprise, really, because I think I hadn't anticipated that sense of endless energy that Lee really had, that drive, that determination, that tenacity, and the capacity she had to keep her eyes in one direction and never look away. It's so admirable. And I think in the world that we live now, the more we can get out and just make a difference, however small, I think really matters. And that for me has been something I've felt through people seeing the film, and that's huge.
Yeah, it is my bag.